The story of Israel begins thousands of years before the modern state existed. The land known today as Israel and Palestine has been one of the most contested and historically important regions in the world. Located between Africa, Asia, and Europe, this territory became a crossroads for trade, religion, migration, and war. Over centuries, empires rose and fell across this land, leaving behind layers of culture, religion, and political struggle. According to Jewish religious tradition, the origins of the Jewish people began with Abraham, who is believed to have lived around 2000 BCE. Jewish tradition says that Abraham traveled from Mesopotamia to the land of Canaan after receiving a divine command from God. The descendants of Abraham later became known as the Israelites. The Hebrew Bible describes how the Israelites eventually migrated to Egypt during a famine and later became enslaved. The story of Moses and the Exodus became one of the central foundations of Jewish identity. According to tradition, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and back toward the Promised Land. By around 1200 BCE, the Israelites had settled in Canaan. Tribal communities slowly united and formed early kingdoms. Saul became the first king of Israel, followed by King David, who captured Jerusalem and made it the political and spiritual capital of the kingdom. David's son, Solomon, built the first temple in Jerusalem. The temple became the center of Jewish worship and national identity. During this period, the Kingdom of Israel reached significant power and influence. However, internal divisions weakened the kingdom. After Solomon's death, the territory split into two states, the Kingdom of Israel in the north and the Kingdom of Judah in the south. Foreign empires soon targeted the divided kingdoms. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. Many inhabitants were deported or scattered. Later, in 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire conquered Judah, destroyed the first temple, and exiled many Jews to Babylon. This exile became a defining moment in Jewish history. Even while living outside their homeland, Jewish communities preserved their identity, religion, and traditions. The dream of returning to Jerusalem remained strong. In 539 BCE, the Persian ruler Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon and allowed Jews to return to Jerusalem. The Second Temple was eventually built, restoring Jewish religious life. Over the next centuries, the region came under Greek rule after Alexander the Great's conquests. Hellenistic culture spread across the Middle East, influencing local populations. Tensions grew between Jews who accepted Greek customs and those who resisted them. In 167 BCE, the Maccabean revolt broke out against the Seleucid Empire. Jewish rebels eventually regained control of Jerusalem and established the Hasmonean kingdom. The Romans later entered the region in 63 BCE. Roman rule brought political instability and heavy taxation. Jewish revolts against Rome became increasingly common. One major rebellion erupted in 66 CE. Roman forces crushed the revolt and destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE. The destruction of the temple transformed Jewish religious life forever. Another uprising, the Bar Kokhba revolt, took place between 132 and 135 CE. Rome brutally suppressed the rebellion. Large numbers of Jews were killed, enslaved, or expelled. The Romans renamed the region Syria-Palestina in an effort to weaken Jewish connections to the land. Over time, many Jews spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. This became known as the Jewish diaspora. Despite exile, Jewish communities maintained spiritual and historical ties to Jerusalem and the land of Israel. Religious prayers, holidays, and traditions continued to emphasize the hope of return. Meanwhile, the land itself changed hands repeatedly. Byzantines, Persians, Arabs, Crusaders, Mamluks, and Ottomans all controlled the region at different times. In the 7th century, Muslim Arab armies conquered the area. Jerusalem became an important city in Islam because of its connection to the Prophet Muhammad's night journey. Under Islamic rule, Jews and Christians were generally allowed to practice their religions, though they often faced restrictions and taxes. Jewish communities continued living in cities such as Jerusalem, Safed, Hebron, and Tiberias. During the medieval period, Europe experienced the Crusades. Christian armies captured Jerusalem in 1099 and massacred many Muslims and Jews. Muslim forces later retook the city under Saladin. For centuries afterward, the region remained under Islamic control. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire conquered the territory and ruled it for about 400 years. Under Ottoman rule, the area was relatively quiet compared to Europe. Small Jewish communities remained, while the majority population consisted mainly of Arabic-speaking Muslims and Christians. By the 19th century, major political changes were transforming Europe and the Middle East. Nationalism began spreading across many societies. Jewish communities in Europe faced rising anti-Semitism, discrimination, and violent attacks. Pogroms in Eastern Europe, especially within the Russian Empire, forced many Jews to flee. At the same time, some Jewish thinkers began promoting the idea that Jews needed a homeland where they could live safely and govern themselves. This movement became known as Zionism. Theodor Herzl, an Austrian Jewish journalist, became one of the most influential Zionist leaders. After witnessing anti-Semitism in Europe, Herzl argued that Jews could never be fully safe without their own state. In 1897, Herzl organized the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. Delegates discussed plans for establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. At the time, Palestine was still under Ottoman control. Most of the population consisted of Arab Muslims and Christians, though Jewish immigration slowly increased. Early Zionist settlers purchased land and established agricultural communities called kibbutzim. Some local Arab residents welcomed economic development, while others feared displacement and political change. Tensions gradually increased between Jewish immigrants and Arab communities. The foundations of the modern conflict were beginning to form. The late 19th and early 20th centuries transformed Palestine dramatically. Jewish immigration increased, nationalist movements grew stronger, and global powers became deeply involved in the future of the region. The Zionist movement continued encouraging Jews to migrate to Palestine. Many immigrants came from Eastern Europe, escaping persecution and poverty. These immigrants established farms, schools, and Jewish institutions. Hebrew, which had largely been a religious language, was revived as a modern spoken language. Arab communities in Palestine watched these developments with growing concern. Palestinian Arabs feared losing their land and political control. At the same time, Arab nationalism was also growing throughout the Middle East. Many Arabs wanted independence from the Ottoman Empire and later from European colonial powers. World War I completely reshaped the region. The Ottoman Empire sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary during the war. Britain sought support from both Arabs and Jews in its fight against the Ottomans. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration. This statement announced British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The declaration also stated that the rights of existing non-Jewish communities should not be harmed. However, the statement was vague and open to different interpretations. Many Zionists celebrated the declaration as a major victory. Palestinian Arabs viewed it as a betrayal. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Britain gained control over Palestine through the League of Nations mandate system. Under British rule, Jewish immigration increased significantly. New cities, industries, and institutions developed. Tel Aviv grew into a major urban center. Jewish defense organizations such as the Haganah were formed. Meanwhile, Palestinian Arab leaders demanded independence and opposed large-scale Jewish immigration. Violence erupted several times during the 1920s and 1930s. Riots broke out in Jerusalem, Hebron, and other cities. In 1929, violent clashes led to deaths among both Jews and Arabs. The British struggled to maintain order while balancing competing promises. The rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany dramatically increased Jewish immigration to Palestine. Jews fleeing persecution in Europe saw Palestine as a refuge. Palestinian Arabs feared becoming a minority in their own homeland. Between 1936 and 1939, Palestinian Arabs launched a major revolt against British rule and Zionist immigration. The Arab revolt included strikes, protests, and armed resistance. Britain responded with military force and harsh repression. Thousands of Arabs were killed, arrested, or injured. The revolt weakened Palestinian Arab political leadership. Meanwhile, Zionist organizations became stronger and more organized. As World War II approached, Britain tried to reduce tensions by limiting Jewish immigration through the 1939 White Paper. Many Zionists opposed these restrictions, especially because Jews in Europe were facing extermination. Then came the Holocaust. Between 1941 and 1945, Nazi Germany murdered approximately 6 million Jews. The Holocaust shocked the world and strengthened international support for a Jewish homeland. After the war, many Holocaust survivors attempted to immigrate to Palestine. Britain struggled to control the situation. Jewish underground groups such as Irgun and Lehi carried out attacks against British targets. One famous attack occurred in 1946 when the King David Hotel in Jerusalem was bombed. Britain eventually decided to hand the Palestine issue to the newly created United Nations. In 1947, the UN proposed partitioning Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Jerusalem would become an international city. Jewish leaders accepted the plan despite reservations about borders. Arab leaders rejected it, arguing that it unfairly gave large areas of land to the Jewish population, which was still a minority. Violence quickly spread. Civil war erupted between Jewish and Arab communities in Palestine. Both sides attacked villages, roads, and cities. Fear and displacement increased rapidly. One controversial event was the massacre at Deir Yassin, where more than 100 Arab villagers were killed by Jewish militias. The event caused panic among Palestinians. Large numbers of Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes during the fighting. The stage was set for a larger regional war. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The declaration came just before Britain officially ended its mandate over Palestine. Jewish communities celebrated the birth of a new state after centuries of exile and persecution. For Palestinians, however, the same event became known as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. The next day, neighboring Arab countries invaded. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon entered the war. The conflict became the First Arab-Israeli War. At the beginning of the war, Arab leaders hoped to prevent the creation of Israel. However, Israeli forces were highly organized and motivated. Different Jewish militias united into the Israel Defense Forces, known as the IDF. The fighting was brutal. Cities and villages became battlegrounds. Civilians on all sides suffered. By the end of the war in 1949, Israel survived and expanded beyond the borders proposed by the UN partition plan. Jordan took control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. Around 700,000 Palestinians became refugees. Some fled combat zones, while others were expelled. Many expected to return after the war ended, but most never did. Palestinian refugee camps emerged across the Middle East. These camps later became symbols of displacement and unresolved conflict. At the same time, Jewish populations in Arab countries also faced pressure and hostility. Over the next years, hundreds of thousands of Jews left or were expelled from Arab nations and migrated to Israel. Israel now faced enormous challenges. The new state had to absorb immigrants, build institutions, create an economy, and defend itself against hostile neighbors. David Ben-Gurion became Israel's first prime minister. The government promoted rapid development. Agriculture, infrastructure, and military strength became major priorities. Hebrew became the national language. The state also passed the law of return, granting Jews worldwide the right to immigrate to Israel. Arab citizens who remained inside Israel faced military rule for years. Land disputes and political discrimination created long-lasting tensions. Meanwhile, Palestinian nationalism grew stronger. Many Palestinians believed they had lost their homeland through force and injustice. Border clashes and attacks increased throughout the 1950s. In 1956, another major conflict erupted. Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain and France secretly coordinated with Israel to attack Egypt. Israeli forces invaded the Sinai Peninsula. Although Israel achieved military success, international pressure forced withdrawal. The crisis demonstrated Israel's growing military power. It also revealed Cold War tensions between Western powers, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Arab nationalism spread under leaders such as Nasser. Many Arab governments refused to recognize Israel. Israel increasingly relied on military strength and alliances with Western countries. The refugee issue remained unresolved. Palestinians across the Middle East organized politically and militarily. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, was established. Its goal was to represent Palestinians and pursue national liberation. Tensions continued rising toward another major war. In June 1967, tensions between Israel and neighboring Arab states exploded into war. Egypt moved troops into the Sinai Peninsula and closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping. Syria and Jordan coordinated with Egypt. Israel believed a large-scale attack was imminent. On June 5, Israel launched preemptive airstrikes against Egypt. The attacks destroyed much of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. Within 6 days, Israel achieved a massive military victory. Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The Six-Day War transformed the Middle East. Israel now controlled territories containing large Palestinian populations. For many Israelis, the victory created a sense of security and national pride. For Palestinians and Arab nations, the defeat was devastating. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza became one of the central issues of the conflict. Israel later annexed East Jerusalem and declared the city its eternal capital. Most countries did not recognize the annexation. Jewish settlements began appearing in occupied territories. Supporters viewed settlements as historical and religious rights. Critics argued they violated international law and undermined peace efforts. The Palestinian resistance movement expanded after 1967. Groups associated with the PLO carried out guerrilla attacks and hijackings. Israel responded with military operations. Violence increasingly spread beyond Israel and Palestine. In 1972, Palestinian militants attacked Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympics. The incident shocked the world. Israel launched secret operations to target those responsible. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack during Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism. The Yom Kippur War initially caught Israel off guard. However, Israeli forces eventually pushed back. The war deeply affected Israeli society and politics. Although Israel survived, the conflict exposed military weaknesses and caused heavy casualties. The war also influenced global economics. Arab oil-producing countries imposed oil embargoes on nations supporting Israel. Energy prices skyrocketed worldwide. In 1978, Egypt and Israel signed the Camp David Accords under U.S. mediation. Egypt became the first Arab country to officially recognize Israel. Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. The agreement reduced the chance of large-scale war between the two countries. However, Palestinians felt excluded from negotiations. Conflict continued elsewhere. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to fight the PLO. The invasion caused widespread destruction. Israeli forces reached Beirut. One of the most controversial events occurred in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps, where hundreds of Palestinian civilians were massacred by Lebanese militias allied with Israel. International outrage followed. An Israeli investigation later found indirect Israeli responsibility due to failure to prevent the killings. The Lebanon War damaged Israel's global image and created divisions within Israeli society. Meanwhile, Palestinian frustration inside the occupied territories kept growing. By the late 1980s, anger erupted into a mass uprising. In 1987, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza launched the First Intifada. The uprising included protests, strikes, demonstrations, and clashes with Israeli forces. Young Palestinians throwing stones at heavily armed soldiers became powerful international images. Israel responded with arrests, military operations, and forceful tactics. The Intifada changed global perceptions of the conflict. Many people began focusing more on Palestinian conditions under occupation. At the same time, Israeli civilians faced attacks and violence. The conflict became increasingly bitter. The uprising also strengthened Palestinian political identity. During this period, Hamas emerged in Gaza. Unlike the secular PLO, Hamas combined Palestinian nationalism with Islamist ideology. Hamas opposed recognizing Israel and later became one of the region's most influential militant groups. By the early 1990s, both Israelis and Palestinians were exhausted from years of violence. Secret negotiations eventually took place in Norway. In 1993, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords. The agreement created hope for peace. Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO recognized Israel's right to exist. The Palestinian Authority was established to govern parts of the West Bank and Gaza. Many believed a two-state solution was finally possible. However, opposition existed on both sides. Some Israelis feared terrorism and opposed territorial concessions. Some Palestinians believed the agreements failed to guarantee full independence. Violence continued. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist opposed to the peace process. The assassination shocked Israel. Peace negotiations slowed afterward. Throughout the late 1990s, settlement construction continued. Trust between the sides weakened. In 2000, negotiations at Camp David failed. Soon afterward, the Second Intifada erupted. This uprising became far more violent than the first. Suicide bombings targeted Israeli civilians. Israel launched military operations across Palestinian areas. Thousands of people on both sides died. Israel began building a separation barrier in and around the West Bank. Israel argued the barrier improved security and reduced attacks. Critics said it divided Palestinian communities and seized land. In 2005, Israel withdrew settlements and soldiers from Gaza. However, Israel maintained control over Gaza's borders, airspace, and coastline. In 2006, Hamas won Palestinian legislative elections. Political conflict erupted between Hamas and Fatah. By 2007, Hamas took control of Gaza while the Palestinian Authority remained dominant in parts of the West Bank. Israel and Egypt imposed blockades on Gaza. Israel argued the blockade was necessary for security. Critics described Gaza as suffering severe humanitarian conditions. Several wars erupted between Israel and Hamas. Rocket attacks from Gaza targeted Israeli towns. Israeli airstrikes and military operations caused major destruction in Gaza. Civilian casualties on both sides fueled anger and international debate. Peace talks repeatedly failed. Questions about settlements, refugees, Jerusalem, borders, and security remained unresolved. Israeli politics also shifted. Right-wing parties gained greater influence. Security concerns became central in elections. Meanwhile, Palestinians remained divided politically between Gaza and the West Bank. The dream of a lasting peace appeared increasingly distant. In the 21st century, Israel became one of the Middle East's most technologically advanced and militarily powerful countries. Its economy expanded rapidly. Israeli companies became leaders in cybersecurity, medicine, agriculture, and technology. Tel Aviv developed into a global innovation center. Israel also strengthened diplomatic ties with several countries. The United States remained Israel's closest ally. Military aid, political support, and strategic cooperation between the two nations deepened. At the same time, criticism of Israeli policies grew internationally. The expansion of settlements in the West Bank became one of the most controversial issues. Supporters of settlements argued that Jews had historical and religious rights to the land. Critics said settlement growth undermined Palestinian statehood and violated international law. Jerusalem remained another deeply emotional issue. Both Israelis and Palestinians claimed the city as their capital. Religious sites sacred to Judaism, Islam, and Christianity made the city globally significant. In 2017, the United States officially recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and later moved its embassy there. The decision was celebrated by many Israelis but condemned by Palestinians and numerous governments. Meanwhile, Gaza experienced repeated crises. Wars between Israel and Hamas caused widespread destruction. Israel argued it was defending itself from rocket attacks and militant groups. Human rights organizations often criticized Israeli military actions and the humanitarian impact of blockades. Israeli civilians also continued facing security threats. Rocket attacks, stabbings, shootings, and militant violence created fear and trauma. Many Israelis believed strong military policies were necessary for survival. Political divisions inside Israel intensified as well. Debates over religion, democracy, judicial reform, settlements, and security became increasingly fierce. Mass protests erupted several times over government policies. The conflict reached another devastating stage in October 2023. Hamas launched a large-scale attack on southern Israel. Hundreds of Israeli civilians and soldiers were killed, and many hostages were taken. The attack shocked Israel and the world. Israel responded with a massive military campaign in Gaza. The war caused enormous destruction and high civilian casualties. International debate intensified. Some governments strongly supported Israel's right to self-defense. Others condemned the humanitarian consequences of the war. Protests erupted across the world. The conflict deeply affected global politics, diplomacy, and public opinion. Inside Israel, security fears increased dramatically. Many Israelis felt the attack proved that militant groups remained a major threat. At the same time, Palestinians in Gaza experienced severe suffering from bombing, displacement, shortages, and destruction. The future of the region became even more uncertain. Today, Israel remains both admired and criticized around the world. Supporters point to its democratic institutions, technological achievements, and survival in a hostile region. Critics focus on occupation, settlement expansion, military actions, and Palestinian suffering. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the most emotional and complicated disputes in modern history. Both Israelis and Palestinians carry deep historical trauma. Both sides view themselves as victims defending their survival and identity. Attempts at peace have repeatedly failed due to mistrust, violence, political extremism, and unresolved historical grievances. The story of Israel is therefore not only a story of state-building and survival, but also a story of displacement, war, nationalism, religion, and competing narratives. For some people, Israel represents the fulfillment of an ancient dream. For others, it represents loss and occupation. Understanding this history requires examining all perspectives, including Jewish history, Palestinian history, regional politics, colonial influence, and global power struggles. The future remains uncertain. Some continue supporting a two-state solution. Others believe the conflict has become too divided for such a solution to succeed. Yet despite decades of war and suffering, many Israelis and Palestinians still hope for peace, security, dignity, and coexistence. The history of Israel continues to shape not only the Middle East, but the entire world. Enjoyed the video? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing stories and videos every day. Your support keeps the channel alive and motivates us to create even better content.